Hello and welcome. Once again, this is an impromptu live Q&A. So hopefully we will get some people who will show up and ask some questions. So just let me get started in explaining to you why I'm doing this particular one. We're in the fourth phase of the ascension process. And as I've said before, the fourth phase of the ascension is the most critical. I mean, this is the engine of ascension, is going through this process of getting our energy back. I just recently videotaped a meditation for this, which I will upload as soon as I'm done with this class. I will upload it. I may teach you how to do it here. In any case, people have been asking me things like, because I make such strong reference to being able to clear out the unconscious mind, to be able to have the unconscious mind serve us, as opposed to the other way around. And what is in the unconscious mind? The unconscious mind is filled with all of our unconscious assumptions about life, our attachments, our feelings, our beliefs, things that usually happened when we were either little kids or a long time ago. And what we don't realize is that when we go through traumatic experiences is that in order to survive, our minds make assumptions and come to conclusions. In order to survive, I have to do this. And so we create these things in order to get us through very difficult traumatic experiences. And then ideally, we should be able to process them further and gain more knowledge and more awareness, but lots of times that doesn't happen. We get stuck. And so these old attachments, these old assumptions, these old beliefs, usually connected to traumas, keep us trapped. And we live out the rest of our lives based on all of these old ideas or these inaccurate ideas that really don't function. And so I want to address that, and I'm probably going to go in a bunch of different directions and talk about history and talk about spirituality and talk about energy and all this kind of stuff. This is obviously not a subject that can be handled in a short 3-minute video, and really can't be handled in an hour-long video, but I wanted to at least go deeper. One of the reasons is because I'm a little worried that people are experiencing me as being too harsh, too judgmental, with not enough compassion, because I say that we shouldn't be victims and that we should not live as victims. And oftentimes that can come off as a judgment. And what I'm really doing is I'm reflecting my ruthless attitude towards myself, in that I've just learned through experience that indulging in any kind of victim mentality just doesn't work. It never ever works. And so just to even examine why it is that we get victim mentalities is interesting to me, because the main thing that I focus on in my spirituality is, what is the practical benefit? Does it work? So just let me give you a brief example. One of the things connected to a victim mentality that never works is when you go to God or whomever you pray to and say, why me? And you complain. And I know in the past, and listen, I've done it all. Everything you've done, I've done too, I'm sure. And I can remember times when things were difficult or things weren't going the way that I wanted them to. And again, I'm not minimizing that, but that's really what it was. Things weren't going the way that I wanted them to. And I was very sad and upset and frustrated. And I would go to the universe, why? Why me? Why are you punishing me? Whatever it was. And if I really examined that feeling, and if I really get honest with why I'm doing that, I'm trying to manipulate the universe to feel either sorry for me or to feel shame so that I'll get what I want. And who does that? Little kids do that. Little kids complain. Little kids mope. Little kids have temper tantrums. And it works a lot of the times. There are a lot of parents out there that, that's just, they can't fight that, and they'll either respond by punishing or shaming the child, or they go the opposite direction and try to appease the child, and neither of them works. And the truly loving response is to be there with the child when they're upset and to acknowledge their feelings and say, I understand why you're upset. I would be upset in your situation as well. It's okay to feel that way. And then, continue to explain why, for whatever reason, the child can't have what they want. That gives the child an experience that they take with them in the rest of their lives. So unfortunately, not all of us had the best parents or guardians, and so we didn't have that experience. And unfortunately, that this is something that gets lodged in the unconscious. So if, again, I'm giving you an example which I think everybody can understand, but it's usually a much deeper, more, I don't want to say complex, but it's a deeper, complex process than this. But this is something we can all understand. So let's say that the parents choose to appease the child because they, for whatever reason, they either don't have the skills or can't handle it or whatever, and so they just give the child whatever they want. Well, of course, the child is going to become spoiled and will become narcissistic and all kinds of things like that. And so that goes into their unconscious. And those things, as you know, if you've run into people like that, it's almost impossible for them to change. I say almost because everybody can change if they really want, but for the most part, people don't change. It's because they're either unable or unwilling to go through the self-examination necessary. Now, here's the great thing about traumatic experiences. Traumatic experiences hold in them a great deal of pain. And here is a truth. We don't grow unless we have to. It's just human nature, including me and everybody. And that's how I know. I've had some tough experiences in my life. It's some very painful experiences that have lasted for long periods of time. And it has been the pain of those experiences, the pain of those dynamics that has given me the necessity to change. So if you have traumas in your life, if you've had trauma in your life, if you've had pain and difficulty, the good news is that that pain that you experience is actually something that can motivate you and, really in some ways is the only thing that can motivate you to change on really dramatic levels. So that's something I've also come to understand. Now, before I get into this question again, let me be clear about something. It is true that there are some traumas and situations that we have experienced in life that, in terms of this particular life that we've lived, that we did not bring upon ourselves. An infant or a toddler or a small child going through, things that we would consider to be, painful, challenging, abusive. I don't want to get into specifics, but, those kinds of things. That there obviously, when you look at that, there is nothing in that child's life that explains how they have deserved that, what they did to make that happen. And so I understand the question, and I understand the objection that people have when they say, well, what about helpless children? So just let me be clear, in terms of that lifetime, there's nothing that those kids, I could speak for myself. There are things that I experienced, and I'm sure you have too, as a kid, that there was nothing I did to deserve those things in this lifetime. So just let's be clear about that. I want to make sure that I acknowledge the pain and the trauma that people go through. So let's just put that question aside. I want to be clear so that you feel that I am coming from a compassionate place, hopefully, and not from a judgmental place. So let me see. I'm just checking to see who's on here. We've got 8 people watching. Do we have any questions yet? Ooh, a lot of people. Being negative is no good. Well, we can talk about, perhaps I am being negative, perhaps not. It's really important that we have the ability to be objective with our feelings. One of my teachers says that the ideal society is where everybody can say anything. That we have the ability to talk about anything. And be able to work through that. That words themselves don't have the ability to destroy us. So, I don't know. You can make the decision whether or not I'm being negative. But lots of times we're just dealing with very difficult, very hot button topics. And what's coming up is the pain within you. And so, we'll see. You can decide whether or not I'm being negative or judgmental. But anyway, Robert says, I have a problem with this, makes me feel weak. So, Robert, let me address that if you're still online listening. And I want you to listen to what I have to say because it might sound like I'm being, again, negative or harsh. But let's all get real here for a second. These traumas aren't going away. Not facing them is not an effective strategy to overcome them. Minimizing them is something that people do. I don't want to do that. So I do not have any desire to minimize anybody's pain. But feeling weak is potentially a good starting place because that's probably what we were feeling when we experienced traumatic situations, especially as children. Children are inherently weaker than adults in all kinds of areas. So if we're feeling weak, it means that there's something within us that is unresolved. And as long as we accept that the universe loves us and that the universe is designed to empower us, just feeling weak is not going to harm us, especially now. This is a safe place. We are adults and we're not little kids anymore. So feeling weak is good. This is the starting place. If we can tolerate that feeling and still have the ability to objectively take action to change that, that I think is a really good place to be. So it does take a lot of strength. Let's see. Renee's saying some positive things. I appreciate that. All right, parents do cause the trauma. The nature of evil, we can talk about that. That will get me probably going in a direction you're not expecting, but we can definitely talk about that. All right, so let me see if there's a question here. All right, I'm not seeing a question here. So again, if I don't respond to your question, it's nothing personal. It just means that either I don't have the answer or I'm on another topic. I can only handle so many things at one time, or I'm not able to give an answer that I think is helpful. So just know that it's nothing personal. All right, so now I'm finding myself having difficulty with this because I want to make sure that I really want to make sure that I don't further cause harm to people or stimulate their trauma in such a way where they can't go through with it. So let me refocus myself. So let's look at the question here. The question is, why do bad things happen? Now, as I've said before, almost always when I talk about how we as divine, omnipotent, eternal souls, that we have created all of the situations in our lives. Now, once we're incarnated in this life, what happens is, going back to the unconscious, what happens is that if we keep making taking actions based on false conclusions that we've made as we've gone through our lives in our unconscious mind, then we create even more difficult and traumatic situations. In fact, people will tend to recreate traumatic situations because what they're trying to do is they're trying to resolve it. And many times, and I would even say more often than not, people end up just re-wounding themselves and making, getting more entrenched. So the idea is that we have the ability to learn. It is my absolute belief, based on my experience, that we have created the situation for our challenges so that we can, in fact, overcome the false understandings. So again, the idea is that as infinite souls, before we incarnate, we know that there's something that we really want to gain mastery over. And we also understand that we almost never grow unless there's pain. So we allow ourselves to enter into potentially very painful and traumatic situations so that we can learn that lesson, so that we can overcome them. Again, there's all kinds of things that I've experienced in life. A lot of you don't know me, and it's really kind of irrelevant for me to get into all of my stuff. But let me share one thing that I've been through, which I think some of you may understand, which has to do with past life trauma. I'm also of the belief that many of the traumas that we experience in life are echoes of past life traumas that we are, again, trying to resolve. So for me, I remember when I was working with one of my teachers. He's still my teacher to this day. In fact, he's the one teacher that I've had. He's really more like a mentor. He was my yoga teacher, but he was a mentor, and he's still my mentor. And I still look to him as a teacher. And I was working with him, this was, 20 plus years ago. And I began to weep. Because he said, like, there's something under the surface or something, I don't know. I think he pointed it out. And I began to weep uncontrollably. And it was strange because I didn't know what I was weeping about. But my body was experiencing some kind of a really heavy trauma. And he was asking me, what is it? And I'm saying, I don't know, but it's really heavy. And then I started saying, I think I died in a war. That's all I could think of. But I couldn't get to it. He said, and he gave me a tape. This was back when we had cassette tapes. And he gave me a cassette tape, and he said, play this while you sleep. And then take note of your dreams. So I did that. And it was a recording of some Sikh, I don't know, yogis singing some kind of sacred song or something. I don't know what it was. And I had weird dreams. I dreamt I was a warrior. I dreamt I was an activist. I was always going up against the man in some way, and whatever. And then it didn't really strike that chord that I was trying to overcome. So I got up, as I did every morning, and I was going through a lot at that time, but I was doing a lot of yoga. So I'd get up in the morning and I'd do my yoga, and there was this one exercise I was doing where you exhale a lot of air out, and so it kind of feels like you're suffocating, and all of a sudden, boom, a vision opened up in front of me. And what I saw was that it was middle-age France, I believe. And I was being torn apart by this crowd of people. And I was a priest. And they were literally nailing me to the door of the church. And they were so angry. There's all these people, and they were literally tearing me to pieces. And I had a vague understanding that it was because it's very similar to what I'm saying now, is that I was teaching them that they had the power. There were some miracles that were going on, unexplained miracles. There was a whole other thing I could write a whole novel about. But bottom line is that I was empowering them, but I was also confronting religious dogma. And I was probably in my way. I probably could have found a more compassionate way, which is again some things I have to learn. I was addressing their fears and their dogma, and through these miracles that were happening, really challenging the status quo. This was again early Middle Ages, so this was probably when Catholicism was just coming into Europe. And I remember being torn apart, torn to pieces, and leaving my body. And as I was leaving my body, I was a very religious man at that time, in that particular incarnation. And I was angry with God. And I was, why? I was here to serve you. Why did you do this to me? And that's how I died. I remember that. And so that is obviously something that I had brought with me into multiple lifetimes. And as a result, I found in my life, now I'm openly identifying myself as a shaman and as a spiritual teacher, and I'm actively pursuing that, and I'm actively pursuing to make that my living. And it is my living. But that was not an easy choice for me to make. And for my entire adult life, I struggled with this. It was very traumatic for me. And I didn't even know why I had such resistance to it until that whole thing came about. And then I realized that when I was on the verge of teaching something, going public with something, I would hit this resistance. And it became like going through mud. And I would feel this anger. And I would feel this pain. And I would feel this sadness. And the only thing, if I sat and I would ask myself, because I really like to listen to what comes into my mind first thing. And I'd ask myself, why am I doing this? The thought would come to my mind, because they'll kill me for doing this. And even just saying that, it brings up a lot of emotion. So what I've come, there's all kinds of lessons in that has actually helped me to become not only a happier person, but a better teacher. I still have a lot of growing to do when it comes to the way I deliver truth sometimes. Sometimes I can be very harsh with my truth. And again, it's just me reflecting my ruthlessness with myself, because I have to tell you, being ruthless with yourself is absolutely essential. Because when we're dealing with this kind of crippling fear and crippling pain, we really can't give ourselves the option to indulge in that, because it never resolves if we indulge in that. So, having said that, I just wanted to identify so you guys have an idea, all kinds of things. Let me see if there's any questions here that I can address before I go on to what I want to say here. There's a lot of good stuff here which I want to get back to. If I'm not acknowledging it, please, again, don't take it personally. Okay, so there's a lot of questions here. Saeed asked a question which I can answer fairly easily. What was the last straw for me before I gave up my Christian faith, emotionally wise? It's a really good question. I've written about this in my books. I'll share briefly about it here, but for those of you who don't know, in this lifetime, again, lots of times we recreate past traumas so that we can overcome them. I became a fundamentalist born-again Christian, and I went to seminary, and I had every intention of becoming an evangelist. See, I was doing that whole priest thing again, the Christian priest thing. And what ended up happening is that I still had a lot of friends of mine who were not religious. And what was interesting is that the friends of mine who were not religious were people that I knew loved me, and that I knew would walk in front of a bus for me. I couldn't say that about my Christian friends. What I saw about my Christian friends is that they were two-faced, they were backstabbing, again, I was recreating that old trauma of being attacked by those, that religious crowd, that medieval crowd. I was recreating it so that I could overcome it. But the bottom line was, as I came to the conclusion again about this very question, which was about, for me, which was about hell. And that was why I became an evangelist, because the idea of human beings spending an eternity in hell to me was intolerable. I couldn't tolerate that. So I wanted to share what I believed to be the saving truth to as many people as possible. But I still couldn't get over that idea that this almighty God, who had created this beautiful universe, who had supposedly created human beings in his own image, had the ability to put the majority of the human race into eternal punishment for simply being mistaken about God's identity. Because that's what it comes down to. You either accept Jesus and you're saved, or you don't and you go to hell. That whole idea of sin, that God is so intolerant of sin. Even according to that sin, we don't even have any control over that, according to the Christians. According to the Christians, we are born sinful and we can't help but sin. So God is punishing us for something we can't even help doing, according to that. I could not tolerate that. And I left Christianity not because I didn't believe anymore. I believed. I left Christianity because I could not worship a God that was so cruel. I couldn't do it. And I really honestly believed that I would die in hell for doing it. But it was more important to me to live with my own integrity in hell forever than to live forever in heaven and see all the people that I saw who had these blinders over their eyes, who had the fake smile on their face, the big giant bags that were forming, even in their 20s, big huge bags being formed under people's eyes with lots of sharp channels and ridges because they were in such extreme denial over how much pain they were in. I would have much rather spent eternity in hell with my friends who I knew loved me and would walk in front of a bus for me than to spend eternity in heaven with those people. And again, forgive my harshness. That was my experience. So I want to get to some more questions, but these questions go on forever. And so I want to get to a few questions. So I want to get to a few philosophical points of view. So let's step back and let's look at this philosophically for a moment. As I see it, we have at least 3 choices to make when we ask the question, why do bad things happen? Especially, again, because the question always comes back to children, which is interesting. Again, that's another question. Why is it okay for us to acknowledge that, there can be adult victims? Why can we process that, but we can't process children victims? They're both helpless victims. So is being a child victim worse than being an adult victim? I can understand that children really, obviously they don't have the ability to comprehend things in the same way that adults do, but you understand where I'm going with this. Is really one better or more acceptable than the other? No. If there are innocent victims, there are innocent victims. And so let's look at it that way. And why do bad things happen to innocent people? Why does the universe victimize people? We have at least maybe three main choices. One of them is that there is no spiritual reality, that there is no higher force or forces, that human life and consciousness is some strange accident that happens out of some mathematical probability, and boom, we sort of came out of nowhere, but we are alone in the universe and there is no life, there is nothing. And so that means that there's no rhyme or reason to any of it. We live in this empty, it's not even a cruel universe, it's just empty. Well, that I can understand if somebody is unconsciously programmed to believe in monotheism, where you believe there either is a God or there isn't. It's easier to accept that there's no God than to believe that there is a God who actually allows this or actually victimizes people. So that's one option. One option is that there is nothing in the universe. It's just this empty place and it's all random. And then we can just go, well, you know, some people get it and some people don't, and that's just the way it is. The second is to believe that there is an all-powerful force or forces who have created life and created human beings, and this force is in control of everything, and that there is a plan. Christians want to say that God has a plan for you. And so whenever there is tragedy, whenever little children or adults or whomever are victimized, it's because that this omnipotent God has chosen for this to happen for some unknown reason that we can't comprehend. Within that are all different kinds of understandings that some will say that there is sin and God is punishing human beings for their sinfulness. I mentioned the book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And, the author of that book came to the conclusion basically that God was not all powerful and he would never want to harm his children, but he just, he can't juggle all those plates at the same time and oops, things happen. So for me, if that's the reality, now that lets God off the hook. God isn't a bad person. He doesn't harm people. He doesn't victimize people. He's not punishing you. He's just kind of an incompetent fool. Which then begs the question, if he created this universe, but he didn't have the power to control what he created, then he is in fact guilty. It's almost being worse than being a cruel victimizer. He's an irresponsible fool. I can't accept that idea, so I don't. It doesn't make sense to me. So we have a third option, which most people don't get to, and the reason for that has to do with our history. And I could launch into how we ended up where we are, and maybe I will at some point, but for now, we'll just focus on this third option. In this third option, we do live in a spiritual universe where there are higher and lower forces of all different kinds. And we are one of the forces in this universe. And we are the ones who create our lives. As I've taught before, I liken it to a video game. We live multiple lifetimes. And while I'm on the subject, it wasn't until the advent of the Abrahamic monotheist traditions that people stopped believing in reincarnation. Our ancestors believed in it, our Germanic ancestors, our Celtic ancestors, the Vedic people believed in it. The people that I've worked with in other traditions, in the African tradition, they believe in it. It's not a big part of their religion, but they do believe in it. In fact, I remember my African drum teacher, whenever little kids would come into the room, he would get this smile on his face, and he would call them grandfather or grandmother. He would treat them as they were the elders because he knew that they had just come from another life, that they had come from the realm of the spirit and they had another life that they had lived and they were doing it again. And so he knew that they could potentially be his grandmother or his grandfather, or great-grandmother or grandfather, and so he called them that. So our ancestors all believed this. It wasn't until the advent of Abrahamic monotheism that we were institutionalized to believe that this is the only life that we have. So I could go on and on about that, but that's why we are stuck with this question of why does God let bad things happen to us? Because we have been indoctrinated into believing that there is only this life and that if you don't get it right, you're screwed forever. So the third option is the only one that makes sense to me. That we are, in fact, the architects of our existence. That we choose to create everything that has happened to us. Either, as I said, with children, when children are born, obviously in that lifetime, they are not responsible for what is done to them. They didn't do anything to deserve it. So I'm not blaming them. They're obviously not sinful. So then we're stuck with the question, why does it happen? It does happen. Why does it happen? Either somebody's doing it to them, or they're helpless victims. They live in this empty universe that can toss them around and there's no safety for any of us. Or they had the power to choose before they came here to create a challenging situation that they could learn from. And I can promise you that every single one of my challenging circumstances, when I adopt this attitude, when I say to myself, why have I created this? What do I want to learn? I always grow. Always. And I can also tell you, in my life, every single time that I have adopted a victim mentality, I only stay stuck in it. You know, for years, like many of you, I tried to cajole the universe into giving me what I wanted, either through anger or through grief or through temper tantrums or through whatever it was. And, you know, when people walk around, people who choose to be angry, who choose to be depressed, and you know the people you're around them, and they're just so miserable to be around. What they may not realize is that that is a life choice that they believe, it's somewhere in their unconscious mind, they believe that if they mope enough, that the universe will relent and give them what they want. It never works, though. The only thing that happens is that they lose their life force energy and it ends up making them sick, and they either create more drama in their life or they die of a disease. That's all that comes of that. So, you know, for those of you who may be having difficulty getting past this idea, all I can tell you is, one, I do recognize your pain. I don't know what you've experienced. I don't know if I could have lived through what you experienced. I'm not trying to say that. But I believe that you are powerful enough to get through whatever you went through. And I know for me, when I adopt the attitude that I myself must have created this, therefore I must know what the solution to this problem is, I always find a way out. Always. It has never failed me. Listen, I'm going through some really difficult challenges in my life right now. In fact, they may be among the most challenging I have ever experienced. And I don't want to get into that. Maybe someday I will, but I'm in too deep right now. It's happening. And it's taking all of my strength to keep my body from going into physical shock and pain. You know, I get back spasms when I'm not, you know, really connected to my feelings, and if I'm not connected to myself, and so I'm kind of on that edge where I'm able to just keep myself from going into that. I'm working really hard, but this is one of the main things, is that I understand that this is something I chose. I chose to be in this, and I'm continuing to choose to take the conscious way through it. And so it's always worked for me in the past, and it's working for me now. So some of us have to do some work to get there, and that's where we have the exercises. Okay, so let me see if I can find some questions I can respond to. So let's see. All right, so forgive my silence. I'm just trying to look for some positive questions here. So, okay, so again, just going back philosophically, I got a little emotional there. So you've got three choices. Choices that you live in an empty universe, empty, chaotic universe. You live in a universe created by an almighty being that either is cruel and or incompetent, or we live in a spiritual universe where we ourselves are gods and we have created our lives, and that each lifetime is merely just an interesting lesson that we go through in order for the soul to grow and learn. And so again, the question is, do you want to be a victim, or do you want to be a powerful, creative being? Do you want to continue to live in pain, or do you want to live a happy, fulfilled life? Those are the questions that I present to you. The middle path of denial will not work. One of the things I have seen over and over and over again as a practicing shaman, working with people who have debilitating illnesses, is that they are ill because of denial. Denial of their feelings. You know, everybody's different, so I'm not going to categorize everything as the same, but it does all boil down to that. When we go into denial and we refuse to resolve our issues, our feelings, it gets lodged in the physical tissues and creates disease every single time. So I choose to live and be happy. I choose to be happy. I want to be happy and comfortable, not in a denial state of happiness, actual happiness, fulfillment of my own desires. That is what I demand of myself, and I demand of the universe. And it has worked for me to live in that state. So I offer that to you. If again, you feel like you're the anomaly, where you have experienced more than any human being could possibly get through, and you can't get through it, you know, what makes you different from those people who can get over things? So I guess what I'm saying is you're not different. You're not different from anybody else. But it's okay that it feels that way. I acknowledge that. You know, there's a video going around. I haven't seen it lately. I hope some of you know what it is. I wish I had the link for it. I may have to look for it and find it. But there's a guy who was a paratrooper. And over the years of being a paratrooper, he destroyed his knees. And so the video of him starts out with him really overweight and walking on crutches because he can't walk anymore. And he made the decision that he didn't want to be in pain anymore. And he went to doctors, and all the doctors said, no, you're going to have to live with this for the rest of your life. And then he decided he was going to heal himself of that, and he looked around for yoga teachers, and the yoga teachers wouldn't take him because he was so, you know, crippled. And one yoga teacher started working with him. And then you see in the video of him doing things and trying to stand on his head and do all these things. He's strengthening the core muscles of his body, and he's falling down. And even I, with all of this stuff that I've said, I'm watching this video thinking to myself, wow, look at that guy. All the while thinking that the best he's going to get is that maybe he'll walk without crutches, because he was so immobilized. And by the end of that video, it was so surprising. Not only was he without crutches, but he was svelte, in really good condition, and running like like an Olympic sprinter in front of the camera. He completely healed himself. He made the decision that he was going to be healthy. And that decision gave him the result. And this is what this is everything that I do, everything that I teach, all of the philosophy, all of the meditations, the techniques, everything I teach is based around giving you a practical method to get real results for one thing only. There's only one thing, as I say in the book, the secret commandment. There's only one thing that we are required to do in life, and that is to fulfill our deepest spiritual desire. That is the only thing that we are required to do. And if we allow ourselves to be talked out of that by either other people or other people's opinions or our own self-directed shame or our own pain or our fear, then the only person that we have harmed is ourselves. Conversely, if, like that paratrooper, if we ruthlessly, like our ancestors said, are willing to die in battle, meaning that we live every single day with the ruthless conviction that I am going to get everything that life has to offer me. And whatever I have to do to overcome my own limitations, I am willing to do that. And I'm not willing, for one reason, I don't want to miss out on all of the joy that there is in this world. I don't want to look back on this life and ask myself, do I regret something? Was there something I could have had that I didn't get? And this is what I see. A lot of people like me, just as human as I am, who run into the same fear, the same pain that I do, make the choice either to appease other people or to avoid the pain or to avoid the fear. They don't work through it. They choose to stay stuck. And the problem with that is that, remember this. Hopefully you'll remember this when you translate out of this body. When you leave this body that you're in and you go to the next one, you are going to remember that that is the most important thing in life. And you'll look back on your life, and if you find that you didn't get everything you wanted, you know what you're going to do? You're going to go, you know what? I got to go back. I didn't get what I wanted. I need to go back and get it. And if you have to create painful, challenging situations in order to wake yourself up so that you will be ruthless about getting everything that you want, that's what you will do. So if you are in this lifetime and that is what has happened, that as a child you experienced things that were unfathomable to you, then the only healthy, constructive way to look at that, in my opinion, is to say, okay, I chose this. I must know the way out. There must be a huge payoff in this for me. I am going to work through this. I am going to succeed. I am going to be victorious over this. Because otherwise, what choice do you have other than being miserable and depressed and a victim? What other choice do you have? Denial? That won't work. This, to me, is the only way out of it. And it's also, in my experience, the only way, or I should say the best way. In my experience, it's the best way to get everything you want out of life and to be fulfilled and to be happy. Because that's it for me. There's only one thing I care about. I want to be happy. I want to be happy and fulfilled in my life. And so this is what's worked for me. Anyway, so let's see. Anything else? Any other questions here? Let me see. Went off on quite a tear there. So sorry, I'm just looking at the questions. I'm not seeing anything that I haven't either already addressed or, I'd just be repeating myself. Okay. So let me go through now. I think I want to go through a little bit of history. So if you're not bored to death by what I'm saying, I want to go through a little bit of history. Maybe I'll be a little less emotional about it. As you know, in my book that I wrote entitled, Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward, in that book I talked about the history of monotheism and the Abrahamic religions, which is really what started all this. Specifically when the worship of Jehovah as the one God in ancient Israel. When that happened, that was the model that was then adopted by the Romans, which then was taken into the rest of history. So Christianity was being spread during this time, during the Roman conquest, and then later the Holy Roman Empire, which conquered all of Europe. And we went through what we call a Dark Age. And so after the fall of Rome, we lost all kinds of technology that the Roman Empire had used. Even to this day, there are still things that, aqueducts and things like that the Romans were able to do that we still don't know how they did it. While we're on that subject, the ancient Egyptians, the building of the pyramids, we still don't know how they did that. Even with all the technology we have today, we don't even know if we could do it now. And so what happens is that when we go through these periods of civilization, and then there's a fall. Now, what I didn't realize when I wrote that book is that the Mediterranean society at that time, at the end of the Bronze Age, which is when the worship of Jehovah, the Abrahamic religions, was being created. That was happening during the end of the Bronze Age. And so what was going on at that time was, it was like a Dark Age. They were going from the Bronze Age to whatever the next one was, this Iron Age. And in between those two, it wasn't seamless. There was this Dark Age. And so what had happened is that before that time, in that area during the Bronze Age, the Egyptian Empire was very powerful and had control over the Canaanite Empire. And as you know, if you read the book, the whole mythology about the children of Israel coming out of Egypt is pure fantasy. It never happened. It's a mythology that was created because what was happening is that they were going through this Dark Age where they were shifting their identity from the Canaanite kingdom to this new kingdom they were creating, the kingdom of Israel. And so in order to create this new identity, which was separate from the Egyptians, which really the Canaanite kingdom was a vassal state of the Egyptians, it was part of the Egyptian. They were constantly being, run over by somebody. They wanted to be independent, so they recreated this whole mythology about themselves. And in this mythology, they destroyed the Canaanite civilization, which was a polytheist civilization. They wanted to have military and political control over their subjects, so they created this jealous God who would not allow them to worship all of the other gods surrounding them. So it was really about politics, which again, that's what happened with the Roman Empire. It went into Europe. The way to get political control was to control the religion. The best way to do that was with this monotheist God. And so they wiped out the ancient European shamanic history and imposed this Abrahamic one on it because it worked so well. And so now, and I remember as a kid, I remember going to church and thinking emotionally that my ancestors were these ancient Hebrews. It never once dawned on me that I wasn't Hebrew. So the same thing happened, the first people that came over here, the Puritans, they came over here with this idea that they were the children of Israel. So this is the only point I'm making, is that we supplanted our shamanic understanding, our polytheist understanding, our nature worshiping understanding that we are a power within a community of powers, and turned it into we are the creation of this almighty, angry, jealous God up there. And so therefore everything that happens is a result of God's will. And that has been so hammered into our collective unconscious that this is why people are either born-again Christians or they're atheists. To give you an example, there's no middle ground. The idea of polytheism, paganism, and nature worship is still in its infancy again in the Western world, which is why people make so much fun of it, because it's still in its infancy. So the point about that is I want you to absorb that concept and meditate on it and ask yourself how much of your thinking has been influenced by that. And again, the unconscious mind makes 99.99% of all of our decisions and all of our reactions. This is why it's so important that we get conscious awareness, where we get the unconscious mind to serve us instead of the other way around. And I can guarantee you that anybody who has an awakened conscious awareness and has gained some mastery over their unconscious mind will not feel victimized, nor will they see anybody else as a victim, whether it's a child or whether it's an adult. So I know that for some people, the thought of getting rid of, some people get really offended and will take it as an offense to even think of the possibility that a child being victimized was done by their choice. They take it as an affront. And for them to even accept that idea, they believe that they're minimizing and harming that child all over again. But if you can see yourself in that child, or maybe you were that child, and if you can see yourself as an omnipotent soul that chose to limit themselves to such a degree that they wanted the joy of learning how to be omnipotent again, then you cannot see them as victims. And again, I say, if your first response to me telling you that you've created everything in your life, if your first response is to say, well, what about the poor children? That is because you see yourself as a helpless child. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not judging you for that. I want you to be honest and acknowledge that and have those feelings. It means that you didn't, in order to survive, you didn't allow yourself to feel that helplessness and that pain. And you should. And work through it and get your power back. So having said that, I'm gonna upload, when I'm done with this, I'm gonna upload a video where I teach you exactly how to do that. I gave you a little bit of a visualization, but I know that that wasn't the most powerful one, so I gave you an even more powerful one. This is a breath meditation that you can actually go in, and if you're willing to put the time into this meditation, you can get all of your energy back from all of the past traumas in this lifetime and in past lifetimes. So we'll see where that goes. All right, so we're getting close to the end of the time. Let's see if there's any questions here that I can respond to intelligently. All right, let me see here. Okay, somebody talking about their horrible job. A lot of intense stuff. I have an 8-year-old daughter and a sick husband. So, Lauren James, this isn't something I can address in a quick question. If you want my help, and I do believe I can help you, it's going to take some time. You're probably going to need to work with me in a private session. And I do offer those. I do charge for them. But that's the best way that I can help you. If you haven't, you can, if you can't afford that, I would recommend getting into the apprenticeship program. And as Renee has said, I think a Vedic astrological reading would be helpful too. So anybody who wants to get an astrological reading, go to thundershamanism.com. THUNDERSHAMANISM.com, and then click on the button that says Vedic Astrological Readings and purchase one. If you don't know how to do that, email me and I'll send you a PayPal invoice. But yeah, listen, when you've got things to that depth and that degree, you have to work with somebody. I did, and I'm nothing special, so. All right, so that's it. I think I've answered everything that I can for right now. we'll go back and talk about it some more, I suppose, later. So I'll be uploading the meditation. Keep your eye out for that. What else do I want to say before I get off the line? Those of you looking for, want to become an apprentice, I'm starting to get more and more people who are signing up for the higher apprenticeship levels. And when I run out of space, just because I only have so much time, I won't be able to take any more private apprentices. So if you're thinking about it, you know, get on it before it's too late. Let's see what else. I think that's it for now. All right. I feel like there's a lot more to say. Maybe we'll come back and talk about this some more, because this is such an important thing. I mean, really, it's I think right now it's the main thing. You know, learning to accept and understand that we really do have power to be everything we want to be. We really do have that. And that it does take some work. I don't want to minimize that. I mean, I've been doing this kind of work for 35 years. I've been doing this for a long time. So it does take some work. But, you know, if we're infinite beings, it's only a drop in the bucket. And it is my hope that I can find quicker ways to do it. So that's part of it too. I mean, I want to find quicker ways to do it. And probably like every other teacher or every other grandparent in the world, you know, they want to say, I just don't want you to go through make all the same mistakes I made. You know, I want you to just, you know. That's why one of the things, by the way, if you work with a teacher that you trust, and the teacher just says, just do this, wax on, wax off, you know, that kind of thing. You don't understand why you're doing it, and he says, just do this. If you trust that person, just do it and see what happens. You got nothing to lose. It's one of the benefits of a teacher. Anyway, all right, so that's it for now, my friends. Until next time, that's it. Anyway, a lot more to come. Obviously, we're just going to have to put a pin in this one. It's not over yet. But anyway, that's it for now. Thank you. I'll upload that video. I'll edit it and upload it tonight. So talk to you later.